Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories.
Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Elliot.
And I'm Jodi.
And today we're actually going to talk about something that was, I kind of brought up at lunch with you the other day.
Yeah, and you actually seem like you're doing a little better.
I am doing better.
I make you sound like you were like in the pits or something.
I was kind of, well, I guess you'll hear, because my story is all about kind of being off kilter and a little bit of what you might call business depression. Yeah, and I think it's something that I've wanted to talk about for a while now. I just happened to be feeling it at lunch the other day, so I'm glad we can get to it. Okay, great.
I can't wait to hear how that works. So before we do, though, I want to make sure we thank our patrons. First, our first patron and our premier patron, Mind Over Machines and Tom Loveland. Also, catscopy.com and GWW Architects. Thank you for being some of the first folks to jump in at our different patron levels, which you can find at patreon.com and SHMS Podcast.
Thank you so much.
Let's go.
You ready?
Yep.
Okay. So my story actually begins with our conversation at lunch the other day, because I told you that I was feeling so incredibly unmotivated that even the things that would normally be really interesting to me were not anything that made me want to get out of bed. And I had this general feeling of malaise, and I don't even know how to describe it.
I think we joked it was like business depression, kind of.
Yeah, it was like business depression, maybe not in the clinical sense, but just the blues kind of
Well, in
sense.
that, the thing that I think can often be most salient about depression is not clinical depression, but that sense where like all the things you love, sort of the gum lose their flavor, and
yes.
things that I like that gum, but right now, bleh.
That's right. And by the way, I have to say there's something Seinfeldian about the way we have to talk about depression now, because it used to be, at least when I was growing up, that you could say I'm really depressed, but now you can't say I'm really depressed unless you then follow up very, very quickly with, I don't mean clinically depressed, because I certainly recognize the struggles of people who have clinical depression. I'm not in any way comparing my situation to theirs. However, I am depressed. And it strikes
like
me as
layperson depressed.
Yes, layperson depressed. It's like a Seinfeld. Not that there's anything wrong with that.
There's anything wrong with that.
But so anyway, I was in the gum had lost its flavor, to use your phrase, which I really like. And I was getting into the office this morning, and I was kind of taking stock. Actually, it was a little bit later after I'd come into the office. I was taking stock of the fact that I didn't feel quite that way. This morning, I felt a lot better. And I started thinking about it a little bit, and I think that it had to do with, in the last 2-3 weeks, I had, and everybody has this really busy time in their lives, but I had a really busy and stressful last 3 weeks. I had jury trials and depositions. I had a car accident. I had, all of these things. And I was really stressful. And I felt, in retrospect, like I was moving forward with my shoulders out in front over my shoes, kind of being propelled forward, but I wasn't balanced. I wasn't centered. I was just lurching from thing I had to do to thing I had to do. And I didn't feel like I was doing them well or with full engagement, because I was always worried about the next thing I had to do. But this morning I got up, I went to the gym, which I hadn't been able to do in a while. And then part of my time at the gym, I spent on the treadmill listening to a podcast that I wanted to listen to. That was I was interested in it. It was educational, but it was not my area. It's not like how to be a better lawyer. It was just something that I felt was interesting. It was a good interview with somebody I wanted to hear from. And then I came into the office, and I set aside my 25 minutes to meditate in this guided meditation thing. And then after that, I could have my typical shake for breakfast. And I sat there and I wrote out the things that I wanted to accomplish today on this app that I have, this checklist app that I have. And so the whole routine, from getting into the gym at 6:30 to finishing up all of that at 8:30, which includes, of course, the travel and the shower and all that other stuff. So that 2-hour period made me feel that I was not running along in a lurching style, that I was more centered. And all of a sudden, the things that I saw as business issues were not eliminated, but they were at least scaled. They were minimized.
So the event, I think, to kind of paraphrase, the things that were bugging you didn't change between yesterday and today.
Correct.
But something about you changed and now they seem different.
They did. They seemed different. And I think it was the best thing that I can say is that because I was able to get my feet back under me, I was more centered. And
can I presume that in these past couple weeks, whether you couldn't or just felt like you couldn't, you had forsaken that morning routine?
Right. I didn't have any of it. Maybe I'd have the shake, but I didn't do the meditation, or maybe if I did the meditation, I certainly didn't go to the gym, and I certainly, and this is one thing that is big for me, I certainly didn't do any reading or listen to a podcast or do anything that they would call sharpening the saw or just expanding my horizons or keeping me curious about something. Yeah. I didn't feed my soul in any way. And I was lesser for it.
Yeah. Well, it's not just lesser. So, oh my gosh, but by the way, this is one of my all-time favorite topics.
There you go.
We could just talk about this forever and ever and ever. So a couple things. One, I think it's the metaphor you were using of your shoulders really far forward is really specifically evocative for me, because when I was a kid, my mom used to use this metaphor all the time for, and I've used it literally 3 times in the last week with clients who were all feeling very similarly, interestingly, where, you know how a filing cabinet or dresser drawers, like you can pull one drawer out and they're fine. If you pull the second drawer out, sometimes maybe not. If you pull the third one out, the thing will topple.
Right.
And so she would tell us that story, and there would be times when we were just sort of all agog as a kid, and she would say, you have too many drawers pulled out. You have to push some of your drawers back in. And that was her kind of code for getting back into center, and like whatever that means. And as a kid, I didn't have like meditation or whatever. It wasn't, those weren't my methods, but sometimes it meant kind of setting better boundaries with people who were, too many blood transfusions all at once kind of thing. There were different things. But that metaphor, I think, is really important of like your own stability. So it makes a lot of sense to me. But even if we step outside the bounds of kind of woo-woo, what to some might feel like a woo-woo psychology or an indulgent kind of take care of yourself kind of thing, there's a real neuroscience to it, because the things that we tend to skip when we're busy are literally the things that help your brain work the best. And so exercise and sleep and, surprisingly, do nothing time where your brain actually relaxes and can have alpha waves are critical for having the higher level thought that most entrepreneurs need. And yet that's what we cut first. And so it's this very interesting thing. So it makes me curious. What about today made you take those steps? Because something we were like, all right, I'm doing it all. What happened?
I felt like, well, I guess there are 2 things. The first one was that I finally figured out that what was wrong was not the things bothering me per se, but what was wrong first was me, because I realized I was not right. And it takes a while, well, for me it does. It takes a while, when I'm so absorbed in doing this and doing that and getting this meeting and doing that. You're right. I cut out all of these things, and it piles up one on top of another until I finally get to critical mass. I'm like, wait a minute.
So there's like,
I can't do that sound. I'm glad you filled that in, because I can't do that sound. But I just realized I'm not at my A game.
Yeah.
And so I'll go through this all the time. I'm not at my A game. I wonder why that is. I know why that is. I just have to relearn that lesson.
Yeah. I think there have to be those triggers. I think that's part of energy management. We've talked about this a lot, that a big part of being an entrepreneur is managing your own energy and making sure it stays where it needs to stay. And a big part of that is being able to have those triggering events where you notice like, oh, I'm not the way I am. And sometimes I feel like we're going to need like a little like ticker on the podcast page of like, how many metaphors does Jodi use in one per episode, and see what my minimum is. But I had a client say to me one time, and I love this because it's exactly what you're talking about. And I think this for myself now all the time, where he said, you know how inkjet printers, suddenly start printing with those lines and gaps and threads in them, and you know you need to clean the print heads. He said, that's when I call you. It's because everything I'm doing has these like lines and gaps, and I know I need to get my head clear, and then I'll know what's really a problem and what's me just, fuzzed out or whatever. I use that for myself a lot because I'll sort of check in. I'm like, do I need my print heads clean? I either do the things I need to do. Like for me, sometimes it's eating better, sleeping better, getting back to the gym. So I have my own routines. Sometimes it's, I need to get to one of my print head clearing people who can sort out my fuzzy mental nonsense from the actual things I need to worry about, because they all get conflated and it just feels like a swirl.
Well, I think that, and that's one of the things that I was going to bring up, the print head cleaning people. Hard to say, but it's a great image though. I think it's so utterly crucial for business people. It certainly has been for me, because I have a short list of people who, I think of, to borrow the H.W. Bush phrase, the points of light. They're not necessarily, although they can be, they're not necessarily the people that I get together with to say, hey, I am having this problem with accounts receivable, or I'm not sure, I think I need to fire somebody. Can you help me? How do I frame that? It's not a specific business problem. It's just people that kind of remind me of where the spark is, and they're doing something interesting. They're passionate about what they're doing. They're engaged in their own lives, and I can kind of feed off of that to be re-engaged and find the passion in what I love. So yeah, the morning routine and getting your center, finding out what that is crucial. The nothing time, which is why most of my great ideas, to the extent I have any, arise in the shower or on the commute or wherever.
What's funny about that though is because I used to do a talk on time, and I would ask people, where do you get your best ideas? And always say the shower. Some people say while running, for those who don't listen to podcasts or running. Years ago, people used to say driving more than they do now, because a lot of times they're either listening to podcasts, making phone calls, doing things. So even it's yet another place, the shower remains this last bastion of peaceful do nothing time, because you can't, except for those people who have the in shower note taking things, which I've considered getting, but
well, my wife had said at one point years ago, she said, do you want, just for some gift or whatever, do you want me to get one of those radios and things in the shower? I'm like, no, because of exactly that. I don't want to clog the airways. And it's funny that you mentioned the car and the podcast and things, because also right now I mentioned that I had this car accident, which means that I'm in a loaner car that the other insurance paid for and put me in, and it's perfectly fine, except none of my stations are in there. And I haven't taken the time to pre-program any of my stations, which means that I'm not listening to ESPN, or I'm not listening to the things. So it's silent in the car, and maybe that's part of it, that you just have to remember to turn the radio off.
Making sure you have some silent time it's hard, but it's really mission critical. I'd love to hear from our listeners, like it's that question, how do you get your groove back? How do you know when it's time? And my husband and I were joking, it's a little bit off tangent, but when we get into sort of an unhealthy kick, like how I know that I need to go drink some water, need a salad, is when I suddenly feel like I need a Diet Coke. I stopped drinking Diet Coke like a year ago, and I'm like, my body needs some water and a salad and less carbs or whatever it is. But I think those are the questions I'd be curious to hear more about. How do you know you need some sort of recalibration, intervention? And then what are those things? How do you get back to center? How do you get grounded?
I think that the how is an extremely difficult question to answer. And some people never do. You have to be intuitive enough. You have to be insightful enough into the fact that not only do you want a Diet Coke, but to realize that is actually masking something else. That signal is not the need for a Diet Coke or the fact that you're thirsty. That's a signal to you that you need to translate into a deeper issue.
Right.
And just like I say, I have to teach myself this lesson over and over again. When I start to feel like the gum has lost its flavor, when I start to feel so unmotivated, I have to start stepping back and saying, okay, I recognize this feeling. Mm-hmm. What's going on? And then you transition to the second question that you asked. What do you do about it? Mm-hmm. And you're right. I'd love to hear what people do about it because I've developed my own ways, but there are a lot of different ways to tackle that.
Yeah, and I wouldn't mind having some new ones.
Yes, exactly.
But what you're referring to is metacognition, the thinking about thinking, the being able to be in the conversation and then watch your own conversation. It's like the conversational version of an out-of-body experience, kind of. And I think it's a really critical one for entrepreneurs because you have to be able to step outside of the experience you're having and contextualize it and say, wait a minute, is this what's going on? I think even if you're not really prone to, because I think you and I are both people who couldn't not do that if we tried. I'm always thinking about way more than I probably need to be. But even if you're not that person, I think the clues can just be when it feels hard and when it feels like slogging and when it feels like nothing's fun. Like those are the times where it can be useful to think. Interesting. It reminds me of another thing of my mom, actually. When we were tiny kids, she taught us this thing that said, if ever something's going on that just seems unspeakably horrible, try to wake yourself up because there's a chance you're having a dream, which actually it has saved me from some horrific dreams as a kid. It's technically like lucid dreaming, but I think it's a little bit like that. Like sometimes when you're feeling like you're having one of those entrepreneurial, I just want to burn it all down days, those are the times to step back and say, maybe I just need a day off, or maybe I need to get back to the gym, or maybe, and those things seem so counterintuitive because, and I think this is what's hard about it, like these last 2 weeks, tell me if I'm wrong on this, the last 2 weeks probably felt like the last thing you could do was take time to work out or take time to read a book or whatever. And yet I wonder if had you done that along the way, you may not have ended up where you were when we were having lunch. Right.
And I don't know because I didn't have the ability to do that. And it strikes me because, and this doesn't add to the conversation at all, by the way, but I did think that what you were saying is I needed to get off the treadmill and get onto the treadmill. And I just thought I'd say that because I thought it was funny. But
I have no idea what that means, but thank you for contributing.
Well, what that means is that I felt that I was running from event to event to event to event, that I needed to take all of my time to...
From the metaphorical treadmill onto the literal treadmill.
Correct.
Gotcha.
Correct. And maybe it would have. Maybe I would have been a lot more anxious if I took what would wind up being an hour and a half at the gym with showers and all that other stuff, saying, geez, this is an hour and a half I could have been preparing for this, or this is an hour and a half I could have been attending to that last thing on my list to check off. But maybe I would have felt more centered, more able to handle the tasks I had time for better. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the issues, though. The issue is, do you want to handle and check off 20 tasks okay? Mm-hmm. Or is it more valuable to check off 8 really well? Yeah. And I think it goes to a larger issue, which we can tackle later, which is if you consistently have 20 and you consistently only have time to do them okay, then that's a delegation thing, and that's a staffing thing, and that's
really is
scope of work thing. But yeah, when you get to the point where you're not doing things as well as you could, then you've got to reset. And I didn't do that.
Well, here's something I think about quite a lot. And I'm sure someone historically can tell me this is not how it happened, but I try to imagine the first person who suggested the idea of pit stops in races. Right? It's kind of, now maybe they always existed, so maybe it's a terrible story. But if they didn't, just imagine the guy who's like, I know, let's pull off to the side, change our tires, fix up the oil, do whatever else they do on pit stops. I don't even know. I can just imagine the crickets in the room like, dude, it's a race. Like, we can't pull off and change the tires. And yet, if anybody doesn't do the pit stops, they will not win, because their tires are run down and whatnot. So I think about that because it's so counterintuitive that it's almost laughable. And yet it is clearly the most strategic and important thing they could do.
Well, see, what I think that conversation probably looked like is there's a debate between one guy who says, what we really need is to double the size of the gas tank. And then the other guy goes, no, wait, what if we keep the gas tank the same size and we don't increase the weight of the car, but we just stop for a minute and we refill it.
While everyone else does 2 more laps.
While everyone else does 2 more laps.
Somebody take Bob out of the room.
Right. So, but you do have this thing. And in a way, although it may be a tortured metaphor from where I took it, but in a way that is the debate, right? So on the one hand, you say, if I could work 25 hours a day.
I'll just work harder.
I'll double my gas tank. I'll work harder and longer. That's better. And then you have wait a minute. What if you don't?
Yeah.
What if you stop and maybe the other people keep lapping you, but you could still win the race, or you have a team behind you over there doing some other things?
Yeah. And like you said, there's a whole other place I'm dying to take the conversation on that. On delegation and a principle out of the book Essentialism of you take the 20% and like what's the 20% of the 20%. But I really want to stay on this concept of energy management. And this is why. I think that so many of the conversations that end up at my table with my clients end up in the world of energy management simply because it is the overlooked thing in business, that there's this weird, I don't want to say guilt, but it's almost like, oh, it can't come back to that. This is business. I need to just work harder. And it has to be this, like, I do these things. I'm making like choppy robot moves.
First in, last out.
First in, last out, blah, blah, blah. I'm making a very serious face. And yet, if you really step back, like, you are the race car. If you're an entrepreneur, you are the race car. You are the machine that's driving it. You're the axe that needs sharpened. You're the, whatever metaphor, you are that thing. And when you are fuzzy, not only is the work you produce fuzzy, but the things you are trying to convey to your team, the vision you're trying to produce, the just the communications, all those things are fuzzy too. That is an immutable law. If you're fuzzy, you can't somehow be conveying all these wonderfully directive things to the people that need to hear that from you. And it absolutely has an impact. And yet I still sometimes feel like it's a little bit of like the world is, we still think the world is flat and we're not quite ready to believe that it's round sort of thing, that the willingness to address your own energy and your own drive and to ebb and flow with it and take care of yourself and give you what you need still feels like something we're not really truly embracing. And I think at a big cost.
I think that part of it, and you touched on this, part of it has to do with what other people think. So that there's almost, in one respect, there's almost a hero aspect. So that somebody in my office says, boy, you never take a vacation. I'm like, I know. Is
that your Dudley Do-Right voice?
That is. I'm that guy. So there's something heroic. I never take a vacation. But what they don't say is, geez, you're only partially as effective as you could be. Because that's the flip side of the coin. And so when we're talking about the race car, I think that one of the important issues is not only understanding your own low fuel indicator, but also understanding what fuel goes in your tank and what you really need. Because for some people...
And what siphons the fuel out of you.
Yeah, and that's right, which is a whole conversation in and of itself, which is extremely valuable. Because it's not just time, and it's not just commitments. It could be other people, the people you surround yourself by, what you're doing. But as far as what goes into your tank, for some people, it's, you need to hear the surf and to walk along the ocean. For some people, it's just, I won't say just, but it's surrounding yourself with the right people, whether it's for coffee or for lunch or just to go out someplace that rejuvenates you or have a conversation that rejuvenates you. But you've got to know what goes into your tank, and it can't just be you're this consultant you always talk to or your person in your business, unless they have a very wide world view. Because there's an old Japanese saying that's translated as, to a hammer, everything's a nail. And if somebody comes to you with just one viewpoint, well, here's what your problem is. This is what... Yeah. It's always the same. And you've got to know what fuel mixture and what additives actually get you back to optimum performance. And a lot of people I find don't.
Yeah, it's... I notice sometimes it's like even the tiniest things. When I first added my first employee who was an assistant, and I had so limited time in my office that I wasn't meeting with clients, that usually she was there so I could give her direction and do things. And there came a point like 3 months in where I was feeling like I don't even know how to describe it. I was jittery. I was I don't know. I was all over the place. And I realized one day when she called in sick and I was there in the office by myself, and so in theory, that should have been more stressful because she wasn't doing all the things that we had quickly grown to her doing, which were fantastic, that now fell on my plate. But what I didn't realize is that being an extrovert most of my life, I now have grown some more introverted muscles. And since she had started those 3 months, I didn't have any time, just me in my office, thinking, pondering, working through things, just me in my space. And I needed it. And I felt so much better after that day. So, I recognized that I added in some time, but I didn't even realize that was something that was useful to me or that filled up my tank. But it's absolutely, I think, one of the things that sucks that time out of you. And not time, but the energy. And the thing that last thing I want to touch on this is, I think there's another layer to it that is really important. And that is that I think this conversation about having just even the admission that you have a low fuel indicator, I think can be a really vulnerable thing for entrepreneurs. It goes maybe back to your hero thing. And that's something I'd love for us to spend a little more time on, and maybe even hear from some of our audience about is I really want to address that vulnerability in entrepreneurship, because I think that is a place where far more harm is done than good in stepping over those places and not being able to say, like, being an entrepreneur is a really wildly vulnerable thing. Like, whichever way you turn, there's something that's pretty confronting. And yet, on the outside, I think it always looks like this, dun, 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 I've got it all together kind of thing. So, yeah,
I think that, which is incredibly important. It's cringeworthy almost. It's very hard for me, having done this for a long time, to look at the people who work in my firm and say to them, you know what, I just got to get out of here.
Yeah.
So now it's easy to say, I'm going to go take a walk for 10 minutes. But if I say, you know what, I'm not coming in today. What I really need to do, I need to sleep in late and go out to brunch with my wife. That's what I need to do.
Yeah.
And it's hard to do. And I found that developing that muscle is one of the most valuable things I've ever done.
Yeah.
So that's our story.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We're so grateful for everyone who's listening in, and we're especially grateful to all of our patrons who've joined us over at patreon.com to support our efforts here. And we hope to see you next week.
And listen, having told our story, we'd love to hear yours.
Ooh, yeah.
So I guess what we're trying to say is, the floor is yours. Go to sohere'smystory.com and join the conversation.
Wait, before you go, there are 3 things that we really want you to know.
First, you can find show notes and links to all of the random things we happen to mention during the episode by visiting our website, sohere'smystory.com.
The second thing is, we like to talk.
And not just to each other.
That's right. So what we really want to hear is your story. So while you're there, you'll also find links to connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and other ways to contact us with questions, suggestions, or even to share your own story.
And if you love the show and want to support future episodes, you'll also find the link to our Patreon page, where we share our extra bonus content.
Or if you can't support us financially, it'd be great if you could leave us a 5-star review at iTunes, Stitcher, or whatever podcast service you use to listen to us. And be sure to tell all your friends.
Until next time.